Appropriate use of herbicides in ecological restoration. Montana's native flora hangs in the balance of successful invasive species management. In order to increase native species' ability to thrive in their natural ecosystems, it is imperative that management plans decrease invasive species establishment to prevent these novel ecosystems that are made up of invasive species, such as on this slide, leafy spurge, field bindweed, St. John's wort, and spotted knapweed, are just a few of the many invasive species that can create a novel ecosystem, such as seen in the picture below, a field of spotted knapweed. Invasive species affect each of our lives in all areas of the United States, with the potential for serious ecological and financial impacts. While all species compete to survive, invaders have specific traits that allow them to outcompete natives. Invasive species reduce the ability of ecosystems to provide goods and services to the public. The control of invasive species can be tackled through multiple integrated management practices. Herbicide is often the most effective management tool for decreasing the growth and further establishment of invasive plants. Selective herbicide application methods have been used to target undesirable species while having little to no harmful effect on the desirable plant species. However, it is imperative that herbicide or any chemical controls are managed exactly as the law requires. The label is the law. Otherwise, chemical controls used improperly can have important negative impacts on human health, fauna and flora, water quality, and soil composition. In recent years, there has been an increasing use of herbicides for management of undesired species, which has had a tremendous impact on crop production and non-agricultural land, including recreation areas and public land, wildlife refuges, conservation land and easements, and wilderness. It's been shown that herbicide application can enhance native plant communities by removing undesirable species and increasing native species. As seen on this slide, this is some of Montana's native flora. To come to a landscape that exhibits shooting stars and Indian paintbrushes and buttercups and bitterroot is a much more appealing landscape that historically existed in this ecosystem, other than a field of spotted knapweed as seen in the previous slide. Appropriate use of herbicide can decrease the competitive ability of non-native species and increase the ecosystem health as seen in this picture. We can maintain ecosystems that were historically here. Overall, evaluations of herbicide effects on environment show potential to reduce soil erosion and increase habitat for fauna. However, the benefits do not always occur as hoped for. Drawbacks of herbicides, potential environmental impacts associated with application. In some instances, the environmental risks of using herbicide can outweigh the potential benefits. In most cases, though, herbicide misuse is harmful to non-target organisms and may lead to irreparable impacts, such as killing existing vegetation, preventing seed germination, and preventing regrowth of perennials. However, if used properly, herbicide can avoid these negative impacts and increase native flora, as seen on this slide. Herbicide application may continue to increase into the future. Applicators and general public using herbicides need to have some understanding of how they work. This would be shown as having a good understanding of the active ingredient toxicity and mode of action. The mode of action is the process by which the herbicide works within the plant cell to kill the plant. Herbicides vary greatly in their properties and mode of action. Knowing the way herbicides act inside plants helps increase use of appropriate herbicide application and reduce the risks associated with herbicide exposure. The ecological impacts of invasive species on ecosystem services. An example of this is the Missoula North Hills from 1970 to 2016. Because of the explosion of invasive species establishment, we have a landscape tipped in favor of invasives with an immense loss in species diversity, and this has caused a trickle-down effect of other biotic and abiotic problems. As you can see, this man standing on the left, in the 1970s, this landscape was tipped in favor of natives. The Missoula North Hills in 2016 became a landscape mostly in favor of invasive grasses. If we do not have integrated management plans, and they could consist of herbicide application, we'll lose our species diversity, and rather than having a historic ecosystem composition and all these beautiful plants to look at, we're going to end up with invasive grasses and barren hills, such as the one you see in the 2016 picture of the North Hills. In 2006, a study done by Heather Charles and Jeffrey Dukes on the top 13 impacts of invasive species on ecosystem services concluded there are biotic factors, natural cycles, and other abiotic factors that are significantly impacted by an invasive species in several negative ways. The biotic factors involve species diversity, community composition, and interactions. This can be seen as decreased biodiversity, causes in species extinction, altered species interactions, such as competition, allelopathy, predation, herbivory, parasitism, and mutualisms. They can cause a loss of functional groups, which then can cause a community to disassemblize. The nutrient cycles involve the energy, nutrients, and water. This can be seen as altered trophic dynamics in food webs, change in productivity, change in rate of decomposition, altered soil resources, reduced concentration of essential nutrients, and change in water use efficiency. Other abiotic factors involve disturbance regimes, climate, and physical habitat. This will be seen as altered fire frequency and intensity, increased soil erosion, and changed flooding regimes, and a change in climate and microclimate, the altered emission of nitrogen gases and CO2, and secretion of salts and change in pH. Montana has 32 state-listed noxious weeds. Noxious weed gains noxious status through rulemaking authority by the Montana Department of Agriculture and the County Weed Board and/or following public notice of intent and public hearing regarding the status of a weed. If a weed is designated as a statewide noxious weed, then that weed must be considered noxious in every county of the state and managed for. For example, a case study in Missoula invasive species management with herbicides. Here's the Missoula County top priority weed species: Canada thistle, common tansy, Dalmatian toadflax, field bindweed, hoary alyssum, hound's tongue, leafy spurge, oxeye daisy, St. John's wort, spotted knapweed, sulfur cinquefoil, tall buttercup, and yellow toadflax. Restoring degraded ecosystems and monitoring success of restored sites is a high priority for Montana land management, in this case study in Missoula County. Many of the obstacles facing management communities can be attributed to noxious weeds. Throughout Missoula County, the residents and the Missoula County Weed District work to manage problems associated with noxious weeds, to develop a collaborative process for all landowners to decrease the impact of invasive and noxious weeds through the use of proven ecological methods and to monitor and control the eradication of noxious weeds. Chemical herbicides are often the important tools for controlling noxious weeds in Missoula, Montana, such as the top priority weed species you can see on this slide. There are limitations to the use of herbicides for controlling noxious weeds because the effects can be dangerous to humans, animals, and plant communities. Herbicides are categorized as selective or non-selective. Selective herbicides kill a specific species of plant and have target rates set for which they can be used. Non-selective herbicides such as glyphosate Roundup will kill or injure all plants that come into contact with it. As a result, following herbicide labels is important for safety and accuracy. Herbicides can be very helpful tools for creating effective approaches to weed control. However, the success of a weed control program is determined by the management strategies used by the applicators. The most effective management methods encompass a variety of approaches, which includes hand-pulling and reseeding of native forbs and grasses in disturbed sites. Therefore, the Missoula County Weed District uses a multifaceted approach to facilitate all the private and public landowners to control the top priority weed species. Herbicide is the most common approach to eradicating the establishment of these invasive species. These noxious weeds that are listed here on this slide, they are noxious weeds that are considered a priority 3 weed species, which means these noxious weeds have a widespread infestation over 1,000 acres in some locations in Montana, and they are managed through the organized cooperative landowners groups. So, considering that we have all these invasive species, It'd be interesting to see what the most widely used herbicides are to control and eradicate these species. This slide shows the number of species of herbicides applied per our 13 top priority weed species. And the most common used herbicide and surfactant that accounts for most of those 13 species is about 5 different herbicides, and one is an escort. So you can see that Tordon 22K, Milestone, and escort, which is a surfactant, Florfront, Telar, and 2,4-diamine are the most commonly applied herbicides per those 13 top priority species. It'd be important to know what these herbicides' impacts are if we're using them so often in invasive species management on our native landscapes. Tordon 22K and 2,4-diamine would impact available forage for livestock and destroy drinkable water supplies. This is because they prevent pre-germination in annual and perennial broadleaf weeds, which basically means that if they didn't just target the non-native target species, they could target all the species in that area and kill any available forage, and potentially contaminate the water supply. However, if used appropriately and followed these restrictions, that won't happen. But you can see 4 out of the 6 most commonly used herbicides and surfactant are safe near our cattle and cropland and sources of water. So, why is all of this so important? The impacts of herbicides and the impacts of invasive species. If herbicide is misused either by quantity, time of day, location, or duration of time, the potential effects on ecosystems can be as unpleasant as the invasive species impacts. Effects on our water quality, polluting the air, effects on pollinators such as bees, which influences plant reproduction, effects on quality of nutrient recycling in our ecosystems, an increase in soil erosion and a loss of clay layer, which can harm the soil microorganisms and worms within the layers. Weakening plant root systems and immune systems, reducing concentration of essential nutrients for vegetative growth and reproduction, and ultimately can cause a loss of species diversity in some of our ecosystems. So considering these potential negative impacts, let's look at a slide of herbicide use and number per volume from 2008 to 2013. You can see that from 2008 to 2013, some of the most potent herbicides, such as Milestone, Imazapar, Garland, and Roundup, were doubled in their use in a 5-year period of time. If in those 5 years we doubled our use of herbicides back then, from 2013 to 2016, it'd be interesting to see what studies have concluded if we've doubled our use since 2013. Because if we've doubled our use from 2013 to 2016 in even a shorter period of time, we could possibly be putting a large amount of chemicals into the soil, and what could be the potential impacts of putting all of this into our ecosystems. So it's just interesting to see that from 2008 to 2013, we have had a very large increase in the number and in the volume of herbicide applications. So what are the long-term implications of inputting all these large amounts of non-native chemicals into our ecosystems? Well, you can see on this graph some of the impacts, such as harming plants' reproductive cycles, weakening the plants, such as these leaves are wilting, some of the plants are dying, even impacting native species that weren't targeted. And in some incidences, if herbicide is misused or there's too much chemical put into the ecosystem that the ecosystem naturally cannot tolerate, not only will one individual be harmed, but many individuals in that ecosystem could be harmed. And this could reduce the resiliency of an ecosystem and possibly cause a reduction in ecosystem connectivity. Furthermore, the increased use of herbicides has created an influx of superweeds, the chronological increase in unique cases of herbicide-resistant weeds worldwide. As you can see, the number of resistant species from 1950 to 1990 has increased drastically. For 30 years, the rise in herbicide-resistant species was slow, until the 1980s when our use of herbicides as part of management plans gained prominent awareness and became very accepted. In 1950 to 2000, there are about 249 different weed species that have evolved resistant to common herbicides, which has severely impacted our agricultural yield and reduction in invasive species cover up to 100%. This is a complicated and interesting role that herbicides now play in potential management plans and could possibly leave land managers to manual options. Looking forward for ecological restoration. Invasive species can reduce ecosystem functions and services by establishment. If not controlled, then ecosystems can be altered into novel ecosystems, which are devoid of natural conditions that historically existed in that ecosystem. Some recommendations for ecological restoration and integrated management plans is a design of integrated management plans with alternative approaches that are combined with herbicides, and to consider potential target species tolerance levels for future applications of herbicide. Thank you for your time, and that's the end.